All right, welcome Home Impodcast listeners to another episode of the podcast. Today we have something very special for you. We have an interview with a screenwriter, producer, and comedian. He's worked on shows such as Hey Arnold, Murphy Brown, Adam's favorite, The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, and most importantly, to us anyway, he was a producer and writer on Home Improvement. Today we're joined by the one, the only, Billy Riback. Welcome, Billy. So glad you could join us.
Of course.
So we can just get started with the first question here. It's pretty simple.
Sure.
We just want to know, so how did you initially get the job on Home Improvement? What kind of led to your first starting working with the show?
Interesting story. I was working with the guys who created on a show called Carol and Company, which starred Carol Burnett, which is way before your time. But she is a legend. In case anybody doesn't know, these guys are really, really young. I have condoms for sure older than these guys, which, by the way, is not a good thing or in any way, shape, or form. But Carol Burnett is a TV legend along with Lucille Ball, and she had a show called Carol and Company in the, I guess, late 80s on NBC. And I was on that show, and that was actually another crazy story, but we don't care about that because it's not about Carol Burnett. Anyway, I worked on that, and it was interesting. It was an anthology show, and we basically did a pilot every week where we had to create essentially a brand new show every episode. We had Carol Burnett, the legend, and 5 fledgling actors and actresses. They were already, but they were fledgling, whatever that word means. And they almost all went on to win Emmy Awards later in their careers, but this is sort of the big thing for all of them. One was Jeremy Piven, who everybody knows from Entourage, and Richard Kind, who was on Spin City, and we had Terry Kaiser, who was in Weekend at Bernie's. And, I mean, incredible people who were just sort of beginning. Peter Krause, who was on 6 Feet Under. Anyway, and that's really how I learned to write. We put on, I think, 39 shows, and it was really, really tough. Because if we didn't have anything by Thursday, if people panicked, namely Carol, she would throw the script out. We had to rewrite the entire thing in one night because an audience would come in on Friday. So believe me, you learn to write under the gun when that happens. And so, because I guess I acquitted myself fairly well, the 3 guys who created Home Improvement came to me very early on, before the show existed. They basically had a concept because they had already hooked up with Tim. And they had a title, and that's a story that I think nobody knows what I'm going to tell you. They had a title for the show. And they said, would you want to work on our next show? And I said, of course, because you don't say no in show business ever. They came to me and they told me the premise, and they said they were going to call it Hammer Time. And I said, no, you're not. And they said, what do you mean, no, we're not? We just told you we're going to call. I said, I understand. Listen, I am not the hippest white guy in the world, I promise you, but you are even less hip than I am. And I said that with total respect and deference, but I thought they were insane because how did they not hear of MC Hammer? Mm-hmm. And they had not. They didn't know what I was talking about. I said, that's his whole thing. You can't call it Hammer Time. So as sort of a way to sort of, I guess, challenge me, they said, okay, what would you call it? And I guess this is the moment that changed my life. I mean, I think I already had the job, but I solidified it because I swear to you guys, in 2 seconds, it sounds so obvious now. It's a million years later. Mm. I said, well, you told me it's about a guy who's going to, try to raise his boys the right way and kind of, fix them to be men. And plus he's going to have the Fix It show, which helps you fix your house and, power it up, et cetera, et cetera. I said, I don't know, call it Home Improvement. It has sort of a dual meaning. I think they were a little annoyed because it is obvious, but it wasn't obvious at the time. I mean, now it's such a standard phrase. Anyway, they looked at me and they went, that's the title. I mean, that was it. It literally took 2 seconds. I swear to you. Like I said, it was a moment of clarity. I've had very few since and none before. But so that's how it began, and that's where the title came from. And sitting in a chair in, I think it was Matt Williams' office, and the show was born. I mean, it was just weird. So that's how I got the job, and it was very exciting time. I will tell you that, and I think you guys know this is how you track me down because I did do the audience warm up. And for any of you guys out there and women obviously who have not been to Hollywood or ever been to a taping of a show, there is a warm up guy. And his function is interesting because he comes out to open the evening and greet everybody, and then if a light breaks or there's a wardrobe change, let's say a scene takes place the next day, they have to wear different clothes. So that can take half an hour, and the warm-up guy is out there killing time, but constantly reminding the audience where we just left off because we're taping, obviously, and they have to follow the story. So you have to keep reminding them what the plot is. It's not that complicated. It's not Tolstoy, but you want to remind them where we are in the show. So you want to be funny, but you can't be too funny. You can't overshadow the show, but they have to laugh. So you create an environment of comedy, et cetera. It's a really fine line you have to toe, but I did it. And it was interesting because you have to set your ego aside because the show is the star. They don't know I'm going to be there. They don't even know anybody with that job is going to be there. But I did do it. So I did the pilot, and I will tell you, which is the first episode, and honest to God, I knew, because I'd done a lot of pilots for shows that went on to become hits and a lot of pilots for shows that you never heard of. Mm-hmm. And I swear to you, within 3 minutes, I said this is going to be a hit. Not because I had anything to do with it, zero. Just I saw the audience reaction to Tim, and I went, oh, my God, this is unbelievable. Because I think in the opening scene, what they call the cold opening of the first episode of the pilot, he said something like, ladies, we love you. Too bad we own everything. Talking about men. Yeah. And they screamed, and I went, wow. If he got it now, remember, this is not, the Me Too movement. This is 1991 or 92, so we're going back a long time. But still, to tell women, too bad we own everything, and they loved him, and they screamed, I went, okay, that's it. The man can get away with it. It's not a horrible joke. I mean, it's a good joke, but, today, so politically correct, it's unbelievable. Right. But back then, you could get away with it, but still, you could cringe a little bit. There was no cringing. Audience went crazy. I went, oh, my God, this is so a hit. I can't believe it. And I was right. Thank everybody. Thank every God there ever was. So it was interesting. I knew, I swear to you, right away. So that's how it all began.
Yeah, that's interesting because we've asked, we asked Richard Karn, we asked Patricia Richardson, when did you know? And it seems like immediately people could tell that you had something special going, and that was actually a question we were going to ask you later on. But it's pretty cool that everybody seemed to know right away this is going to be a hit.
Well, I will say that probably if you asked a lot of actors after they shot a pilot and you spoke to them, Wednesday after the Tuesday night taping, a lot of them would probably say, I think we got a hit, and of course it's canceled 3 weeks later. So, you're not always right. But there was, as I said, because I had done so many shows, I did Murphy Brown, I did the pilot of Murphy, I did the pilot of Roseanne, and I knew those shows were going to be hits as well. And there were others I did where it was sort of questionable. So I had some basis for being able to say that. I will tell you that, I don't know if you guys know this. When I say guys, I mean you two gentlemen and your audience. Mm-hmm. And if I say guys tonight, it's a collective people. I can't say guys and women every time. It's annoying and obnoxious. But when I say guys, it's the all-encompassing guys. Okay. We got you. I want the audience to know. But anyway, I'm not sure if you've heard that we did run a pilot with no cameras with a different actress playing the wife. You know that story already?
Yeah, we had heard that it was Frances Fisher originally.
That is correct. That is correct. Yeah, it was interesting. Well, we did it, no cameras. I mean, you've already heard the story, but it was because she's a tremendous actress. Mm-hmm. But it was interesting because everybody sort of felt that we couldn't really establish the relationship because it looked like Tim was going to run roughshod over her.
Yeah.
And it just seemed wrong. I mean, these people had to convince the world that they'd been married for whatever, 15 years, whatever it was, and you could not buy that. And I remember exactly because I did the warm-up on that. We had a full audience, but no cameras. We just ran through it, and that was a Wednesday. And I had nothing to do with the decision, but the three guys, the aforementioned Matt Williams, Carmen Finestra, and David McFadden, I'm sure you know the names, obviously. Anyway, they huddled and said, we got to replace her. So that's when they approached Patricia. I remember this. It was on a Thursday, and she was loath to do it. She just didn't really want to do any more TV. She'd done a bunch of pilots, didn't work. And again, you may know this, but just there are probably a couple of details you don't know. So she memorized the whole script on Thursday, and then we did it again on Friday, the next day, again with an audience but no cameras, through the roof, so crazy, it was ridiculous. Then we filmed or taped the actual pilot the following Tuesday. So it was Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday. I knew on Friday, and then on Tuesday I was positive. So that's the full, complete story.
Okay, that's awesome. Question I wanted to ask here is, so in addition to writing episodes, you were credited as a producer and consulting producer. Can you talk about kind of what that means in the context of home improvement? Like, I think probably listeners, you hear producer and consulting producer in these more technical terms, but what exactly does that mean day to day?
Well, generally speaking, it's nonsense. Generally speaking, because in TV, a lot of it has to do with longevity, experience. The titles, they're all the same. If you're a producer, you're probably in your first or second year. If you're a supervising producer, you've probably been there a couple of years. Consulting producer is a little bit different because, generally speaking, not always, but a lot of the time, that's a guy who comes in just to kind of make the script funny or you've, I'm sure, heard the term punch up, i.e. put in more jokes. And I did do that. The reason I think I had that credit for a year or so, I don't remember exactly, because I was working on 3 of their shows at the same time. I was on a show called Thunder Alley with Ed Asner and a very, very young Haley Joel Osment. He was 5 years old and he was brilliant. We used to call him the Mozart of comedy. It made no sense. So it was just weird. I mean, he just was preternaturally brilliant. So I worked on that show, and they had a show called Buddies with Dave Chappelle. If you've heard of him, the first thing he ever did. And Jim Brewer was on Saturday Night Live. And that show worked okay, but not great. But I was working on all 3 at the same time. So my job really was to make all the shows funnier. So I couldn't be in the writer's room all the time on Home Improvement. So that's why I think I had that credit, if I remember correctly. So generally speaking, an executive producer is the guy or woman who really is in charge of the show. They run the writer's room. In most cases, they created the show. Occasionally, executive producer will leave to go to another project. He'll still get the credit, but he may not be involved in the day-to-day machinations of the show. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, and, speaking of the writer's room, I think, Adam and I both are interested in writing. He's dabbled a little bit more in screenwriting than I have, and I think our audience would be interested to know, as a writer on an episode, what does that process look like from you to, writing the script to get to the actual filming?
Great question, and it is complicated, but I'll try to summarize so it makes sense and it doesn't take up this podcast and the next podcast. Well, you sit around a table, and it is exciting, I will tell you. It is like a competition. It's like a giant game show, I got to tell you. It's very interesting, but we had an amazingly smart writing staff, and we got along, and there was very little friction. We insulted each other ad nauseum, which was part of the fun, and then you get down to the nitty-gritty, and people would just pitch ideas. A lot of it came from our real lives. Matt Williams was very much a family guy. He's married with 2 kids, and so certainly the initial stories, a lot of them came from him. That's how he and Tim initially bonded. And I was not married. I'm still not married, but we won't get into that. It's not about me. And I don't want my parents to hear the reasons. And I'm not gay, not that I care. And the odds of them hearing this are very close to 0. Podcast,
I would say so.
I would say 0, yeah. Because they don't have call forwarding or call waiting on their phone. So podcast is not happening. Anyway, so I didn't contribute a lot into the family thing, although I've been around families a few times. So I sort of love writing Richard Karn. That was a favorite character of mine. And I wrote the wife, weirdly enough. I had her voice. I can't explain to you why, but I kind of knew her voice. So I did pitch a lot of stories that not featured her in a gigantic way, but maybe gave her a little bit more than in other episodes. But we would all pitch ideas just from wherever they came. And if something sparked, then we throw lines around the table and see if there was a full story, because there can be a germ of idea, but it doesn't really develop into a 46-page script. If there's something that, like I remember I came up to Matt once, and this is interesting, and I said, I want to write the Christmas episode. He actually said to me, this is horrible, but I'll say it anyway because who cares? He said, but you're a Jew. What do you know about Christmas? I said, well, we sell you the gifts. So obviously I was joking, and yet I wasn't. Yeah. And I said, Matt, it's a holiday. Everybody loves, what do you do? I love Christmas. It's the greatest. I said, I have the whole story. I can't explain it. I know exactly. He said, well, let me hear it. So I pitched him the whole story, and I just wrote it. I saw the whole thing in my head, and that happened. Believe me, that happens very rarely. But once you finish writing it, then it goes back to the writer's room, and you have to be very strong to sit in that writer's room and have everybody rip it to shreds. Maybe it's possible, because you have to put your ego aside in the writer's room. It is a team effort. It's collective. It is like whoever wins the Emmy for any show, very unlikely they wrote all 46 pages. There may be 25 jokes they had nothing to do with, but, you know, you can't give an Emmy to 19 people, so unless they're officially a team. But that's what would happen. You'd come back with your completed script, and everybody would read it, and they'd come in with their notes, and you'd have to be amenable to changing either a whole scene, certainly a ton of jokes. Maybe the whole thing didn't work, and we throw it out and start again and go, you know what, this story doesn't really flow, and it doesn't really progress through 46 pages, and you got to toss it. So anything can happen, but you do have to be very open to criticism and set your ego aside. And that's the hardest thing to do in a writer's room, is to not take it personally, because, by the way, it's not ever meant personally. As I said, we're all in it together, and, 2 weeks later, 300 people are going to come and sit in the audience, and 2 weeks after that, at the time, 29, 30 million people are going to be watching. So, we wanted every episode to be the best it possibly could. So it was absolutely the responsibility of everybody in the room to pitch in and try to make it the best it could possibly be. The person who wrote the initial script would get the credit, but it really was the whole room contributing.
Interesting. That's great. Kind of related to that, and I don't know, I think you'll probably be able to answer this question, but how much of the show was improvised, and, was that encouraged or sort of discouraged?
No, it's a great question, and the answer is pretty much zero.
Yeah, okay.
Well, writers have egos too, not just actors, but not just that. I've worked on shows where there was a little bit, only because the people involved, like I worked on a show called Davis Rules with Jonathan Winters, whom I pray you guys know. And that's what he was Robin Williams 100 years before Robin Williams. And Jonathan Winters was truly, can I say that enough, a genius. And you can hand him a stick. Matter of fact, you can go on YouTube and watch Jack Parr, another ancient name you don't know, who had a talk show before Johnny Carson, hand him a stick, and he did 10 minutes with a stick. Just, it's mind-boggling to watch. So in Davis Rules, I wasn't a writer. I did the warm-up on that show. There were scenes where, and I would see the script, and it would say, Jonathan walks into the room, there'd be 4 blank pages. I swear to you. And I swear, and it worked every single time. The editor was a genius, because I don't know how he put it together, because we do this scene 4 or 5 times, and every time it was different. But he could do that. Very tough to find that. So, could somebody ad-lib a line every now and then? It's possible. The problem is that if it's truly an ad-lib, if you're truly improvising, then how do the other actors react? What do they do? Because they're hearing something for the first time, and you're going to throw off the rhythm, and unless it's a flawless comeback, it's going to be a mess. So we really made them, and it's just the way it works in TV, we really made them stick to the script, because don't forget, we've rehearsed it a certain way 1 billion times. Now, it is funny, kind of amazing that you asked that question today, because yesterday I just read about a show that the Disney Channel is going to be launching where it's half scripted, I don't know if you know about this, and the other half will be improvised, where they take suggestions from the audience, and it's literally improvised. And then the actors go backstage, they discuss for a few minutes, come back out and improvise the way the audience wants the show to end, which is amazing. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's certainly ballsy. But we did not do that on Home Improvement. No, almost never.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. And I was going to say, I do know who Jonathan Winters is. He's in one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes.
I know exactly.
Yeah,
I know exactly. Matter of fact, my friend, I'll throw a plug in, my writing partner now, we've been writing movies, his name is Steve Rubin, and he just wrote the definitive Twilight Zone encyclopedia, which is incredible.
We both love the Twilight Zone, so we're going to be looking that up.
I do. I have a different one. That's.
I know you have the one by Mark Scott Zicree, right?
Mark Scott Zicree. That's right. Yeah, exactly right.
Which is great. Steve's is much bigger. Mark's a great writer, and I actually know him quite well. He gave me my first job actually in Hollywood a million years ago. But Steve's book is very in depth, and he goes behind the scenes on every episode. It's kind of astounding. You should check it out if you're a Zoneaholic.
Huge fan.
Steve Rubin, Rubin. There's my free plug. Anyway.
Well, we got time for plenty of plugs, so that's not a problem.
Good.
So we were wondering, this is a question that we always ask too, is, so what's been your relationship like with the cast? Do you stay in, now that the show has ended, do you stay in touch at all? Is it, out of sight, out of mind, or how does that work?
Well, I wouldn't say out of sight, out of mind. I think about it all the time. I really do think about it all the time. But no, and it's a sad thing. I do stay in touch with one or two of the writers. There's a guy named Lloyd Garver who is a tremendous joke writer and a really funny man. And he and I, as a matter of fact, it was interesting when Lloyd came on the show because I was sort of the joke guy. I mean, everybody in the room was funny, but I guess that's what I was known as. And everybody was worried when Lloyd came on the show that we were going to clash. And I didn't clash with people who were talented. I would clash with people who were not talented because that makes everybody's job harder. You want to get home by midnight, not 4. And Lloyd came in, he was fantastic, and we bonded in 3 seconds. So it's funny, people had a complete misconception of how writers think, and Lloyd and I hit it off immediately. We both respected each other's talents, and we stayed in touch. There's a woman named Roz Moore, and I stayed in touch with her. She's got a husband who's a fantastic guy, not in the business, but we stay in touch. As far as the cast, the two, not really. I mean, everybody's sort of gone their separate ways. Patricia, I don't know anything about her, to tell you the truth. Tim's doing his new show, and the boys have had, their own lives. Earl unfortunately died. He was an amazing, amazing guy. I would love to see Richard Karn. We got along great. He was fantastic. I've run into Pam a couple of times. That was the original. And I saw Debbie Dunning a couple of years ago, as beautiful as ever. And that's, pretty much it. It's a sad reality in this crazy town. And we're going back, don't forget, the show debuted, 27 years ago now, which is insane.
Right. Yeah.
I looked exactly the same, and that's what's weird. But it is 27 years ago. And so, this is a lifetime, and things happen. People move away, and it is sad. I mean, I worked on a show called Sweet Life of Zach and Cody for the Disney Channel for 7 years, and we were such a family, and I've seen almost nobody since then. That show's been off the air already 8 years or 8.5 years. And you say to everybody, you say, hey, you know what? We'll never recreate this. This is incredible. Everybody always says that we have to stay in touch. And I swear to you, almost nobody ever does. It's sad. You're a family, and then you lose, 20 family members. I mean, it's weird. It's weird. So it's a totally fair question. Matter of fact, the only time I've seen a few people at the same time was when somebody died, to tell you the truth. Anyway, it's sad. But I'm not going to lie to you. I don't, but I wish I did.
Okay. Well, we don't want to make this too sad for you.
Yeah, this is
No. And I know you're teasing. No, it would be great, but people move on with their lives and other shows, and I don't know. It just seems to be a very, very tough thing to do. But the actors may, like I said, I stay in touch with 2 or 3 of the writers, and maybe the actors see each other. But writer actors, that's kind of rare. That's my take anyway.
Okay. Well, we'll try to bring things up a little bit here.
It's okay.
Kind of an appropriately vague question, I think. But what are just generally speaking, some of your fondest memories from the show? Maybe from the beginning, middle, end. Anywhere during the run. Just some fond memories that kind of stand out.
Yeah, no, very good question and very fair question and very appropriate. There's nothing you can ask me that's inappropriate, by the way. I'll go in any direction you guys want. I promise you. I can be as inappropriate as, I won't say as the president, but as almost anybody else.
Yeah, that would be hard. Yeah,
that would be really, really, really tough.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was in New York. This is going to be not gross, but you'll understand. I was in New York with the guys, with Matt, Carmen, and David. We were developing something else, and I got a call about 2 o'clock in the morning New York time, so it was 11 in L.A., and they were stuck on a joke I forget what it was the episode where Tim was worried about getting a vasectomy.
Oh, yeah.
And, he just didn't want anybody to touch that, the groinal area. Mm-hmm. So they needed a specific joke, and this is going to sound disgusting, but I'll tell you because it's funny now. We're going back a million years. But I was in my hotel room, very relaxed, sitting, frankly, on the toilet. And the phone rang. My cell phone. I guess it was my cell phone. Maybe they called the hotel. I don't remember, but did I have a cell phone then? Who knows? Anyway, and they gave me the scene, and they said, do you have something? And the idea was that Patricia was trying to talk him, or Jill was trying to talk him into getting a vasectomy. Mm-hmm. And he said something like, so I gave him the joke. I remember like yesterday. He said, nobody is going to touch Manland.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Oh, I see, Tim. So now you have an amusement park in your pants."
That's so funny. Yeah, Patricia Richardson said that was one of her favorite jokes that was ever on the show when we talked to her.
She told you that?
Yeah, just in our last interview, she said that was one of the most memorable jokes.
I thought of it on the toilet, the Four Seasons in New York.
So
and the funny thing was that when the episode aired, I think for some reason they re-reviewed the show in TV Guide. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. And the only joke they quoted, remember, as I said, it was not my episode. The guy who wrote it was named Howard Morris, still is named Howard Morris. Yep. And he called me. He was so pissed, not really pissed, but he went, the one joke they quoted was a joke that I pitched from New York on a toilet. And so that was like a stupid highlight. I can't explain it. I don't know why. It was a funny joke. I knew from her that it was going to kill. And, these people come to real life. I know it sounds like such bullshit, but when you're in a writer's room, I was on that show the first 5 years, these people become real. You understand what I'm saying. And so know they're living, breathing. I mean, look, they're living, breathing people saying the words, but they do become living, breathing creatures. And you start sort of sensing how these people would really talk were they to exist in real life. And so plus, the actress, and she was phenomenal. So I knew that she would kill with that. So that was a crazy highlight. I'm trying to remember. There was another episode where Tim got his head stuck to a piece of wood. Do you remember that episode?
Yeah, I thought that was funny, but Adam didn't. So
well, no. I'm going to tell you. I mean, you asked me for highlights. I mean, I wrote a lot of jokes, but I'm remembering this stuff because certain times an actor says a line exactly how you hear it in your head. And Jonathan Taylor Thomas, as you guys are well aware, and I'm sure you agree with me, was 10 years old. He was brilliant. He was. He was a comedian. It's just nuts. His timing, his understanding of the rhythm of comedy was astounding. And the joke was, it was something like, so Tim got I have it on tool time, and he got his head with some glue, I think, stuck to his forehead. And he said, they were in the living room, and he said, to nobody in particular, do you think that when I go to emergency, they'll take me right away? And Jonathan said something like, yes, Dad, I think they'll take it right away unless a guy comes in with a whole table stuck to his head. That was the joke. And because it was a small piece of wood. And from that kid, and he delivered it, I remember it like 5 seconds ago, I went, oh my God, he's unbelievable. He's unbelievable. So that's what's coming to mind. Believe me, I didn't plan this, but I'm going back a long time, and I remember that moment really, really well. And honestly, I think one of the other great moments when we hit number one, and ABC sent us champagne, and, it was a big number one on the bottle, and you go, this is, you dream about this. It's like hitting a grand slam bottom of the ninth to win the World Series. You go, well, that happens for 6 people in history, or probably 1 or 2, maybe, actually. So we're sitting there, and it's surreal because you go back through your life and your career. I was a stand-up comic for 19 years, and I was still doing stand-up. Obviously, I never became famous. But, I had a decent career, but just decent. And so you don't know where your life's going to go. And you're sitting in a room with 8 or 9 other people who have become your family. And you go, we're number one. I mean, we're not athletes, so we don't get to do we don't have a big finger foam at a stadium. We don't have that. Yep. But you got a bottle that says number one, and that's pretty good, So I was in a crowd. I will tell you one of the worst memories because it's sort of funny, and I don't think you've heard this. We won very few awards. We were not, the critics didn't hate the show, but we were not the critics' darlings. It was not a hip show particularly. It was not breaking a lot of new ground. Tim broke everything else, but not a lot of new ground. Mm-hmm. And it didn't, the people didn't care. We won every People's Choice Award for 8 years, as I recall, but we were not going to win a lot of awards for writing or anything else, even though, look, not just because I was in the room. We had a lot of really, really smart, funny people, but it was not the kind of show that was going to win awards, just awards that the people are going to vote, and it did. But we were nominated for the Golden Globe one year for Best Comedy, and we figured this was a lock. It was a lock. Yeah. I think Mad About You and Grace Under Fire were nominated. I don't remember the other 2 shows, but we figured, we can't lose. There's no way, because people did love the show. Golden Globe, not the same stringent measures as the Emmys. And so anyway, so we went to the Golden Globes, and we were sitting fairly close because they want the potential winners to be close enough to run a mile and a half to the stage. And I remember this, like, again, 2 seconds ago, and they said, there's a tie. They said a tie. We figured, come on. There's no way. My parents are watching at home and going, oh, this is great. And they said, mad about you. And we figured, well, that was really the only challenge. And Grace Under Fire. And we all looked at each other like, you've got to be. And I'm not putting those two shows. It's just that this was, Home Improvement was a show that, I mean, nobody talks about Grace Under Fire. I mean, with all due respect. No. And we knew we were, working on a special show, and we just went, okay, that's it. That was our last shot, and I don't think we're ever nominated again. I will tell you another funny moment that has very little to do with the show, but it's a great story. We were nominated for an Emmy 1 year also for writing, but Seinfeld was nominated, so we knew we had no chance. But we went, of course. And I know Larry David from the stand-up years from a billion years ago, and he was sitting pretty close to me. And again, I knew we had no chance, and indeed we didn't, and Larry won. And he went up on stage, and only if you know Larry's is really funny, but I think it's a classic story. He went up on stage, and he held the Emmy. You got to picture this. He held the Emmy high in the air, and this is exactly what happened. He said, well, this is great, but I'm still bald. And
I think I've seen the clip of that. Yeah, I do. I think I've seen that.
Well, if you have a clip, I will tell you something. I taped it because this is the VCR days, and if you hear a laugh, you hear my look. Because knowing Larry, I laughed, and there was silence, and then the audience laughed because I made it okay to laugh. Because people went, "Is he kidding? Is it a joke? Is he serious? What is he nuts? He won an Emmy, but bald." And the thing that made it funny, if you know Larry, was he was totally serious because he could rub that thing on his head all day, and no hair was going to sprout. So it was hilarious. So anyway, that's sort of a Home Improvement related story. But anyway, there were a lot of great moments. But when you become number one and the network recognizes you, it's a pretty astounding feeling. And we were high, and I don't mean that way. We were literally experiencing a natural high. It was an unbelievable feeling. So being on a hit show. Some people could take it for granted. Our writing staff did not. And I remember very clearly, we stayed very late. We were crazy hours. And I remember one night we were just going for a walk at like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. And I'm not going to mention the name of this other show, but we had a rewrite ahead of us that was going to last till 1 or 2 in the morning. So we were just trying to get some fresh air. And there was another show that taped nearby, and the writer's room was close to us. They were going home at 6 o'clock, and they were mocking us. That we had to work for 5-6 more hours. And we went, okay, fine. And that show was canceled 3 months later. We were on the air 8 years. So you got to. There's no miracle ways to make a show work. There's no guarantee if you work your ass off it's going to be a hit. But we knew that we had something, and we were not going to let up. We were going to put our foot on that pedal and drive it, and we did. So
even if you had to write jokes from the toilet, it was just going to happen.
Well, it all happened. Everything worked out. Everything worked out great. I know that's a crazy story, but I had to tell you the story.
That's just so funny that she cited the exact same joke.
Yeah.
And so
it was big. I mean, you just hear the words, "Great, Tim, now you have an amusement park in your pants."
Right.
It just, all the right words are there. I can't explain it. It's from her, I'm sure most actors can make the line work, but from her, you just go, it's like the greatest put down of a wife to a husband on a sitcom. I mean, would that anybody in real life would be funny enough to say that, but certainly for sitcom real, it just sounded. And I remember the whole writer's room was, there, and I could hear them. They put me on the speakerphone, and they all laughed, and I went, I gotta go. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and boom, and then I see it in TV Guide, whatever it was, 3-4 weeks later, and Howard it was very funny. He was so angry. I said, you got credit. No one in the world will know that I wrote that joke. Shut up. Stop complaining.
Except for everyone listening to this podcast.
Except for everybody listening to this podcast. Well, it's a quarter of a century later, guys. Let's all get over it, right?
Home Improvement is always relevant, so that's why we're
there.
Here.
You go. Exactly.
Was that like the first? Or I mean, you said you were kind of known as the joke writer. Was that like your favorite joke ever written, or was there anything else that stood out as far as just like jokes?
Let's see. You're talking about that show or ever in my career?
I would say Home Improvement related.
Home Improvement.
Yeah,
that's the one that stands out. I did love the Christmas episode because there was a twist, and I saw it in my head. I knew, if you know the episode, it's the last episode where the boys have been torturing Taryn telling there's no Santa, there's no Santa, there's no Santa, and they're so mean to him, it's horrible. And then at the end, Santa Claus walks in, and they're just assuming it's Wilson because, of course, it's Wilson. And then they look in the backyard, and there's Wilson waving, and we go out on that. And, I mean, I swear to you, it just sounds so ridiculous, and I swear to you, I get a chill at this moment because, we all want to believe in miracles and magic, et cetera, et cetera. And the boys' look on their faces when they saw Wilson waving was so phenomenal because I got a laugh and then this crazy reaction, and that's what I pitched to Matt. That's how I knew the episode was going to work. I knew that moment. I kind of went backwards from that moment because that's what I saw in my head. I don't know. I can't explain it, but every now and then you just sort of have that moment of real clarity, and it kind of wrote itself from backwards to the beginning. So that was my favorite moment in the 5 years I was on the show. Was Wilson waving and the boys freaking out. So.
Well, there you go. It's something we talked about. I remember. I think we were confused. We were like, "Wait, how are we supposed to take this? Is Wilson Santa? What's the realism here?" Because in general, Home Improvement, it's pretty set in the real world.
100%.
And so that threw us for a loop when we saw it.
Well, it was kind of supposed to. I think you go with the flow that it's a Christmas episode.
Yeah. Yep.
We'll suspend disbelief a little bit. And, if there's any little kids watching, because Matt was very cognizant of that. He didn't want to ruin anything for kids, and the show was pretty much G-rated. I mean, we said so little that was, in any way unacceptable. I will tell you, actually, it's another Patricia joke. I'm remembering it now that I've said that it was G-rated. This is the dirtiest joke we ever got away with, which was my joke. I'm sure you'll remember this, and it was a Patricia joke. But the thing about Home Improvement was that we found a way to word stuff so a joke could be taken on a few levels. That if you were 8 years old, there was no way you were going to get the filthy meaning. You would just think it was silly or cute or whatever, and the parents could roar and not being worried that their kids were going to go, "Mommy, what does that mean?" You know what I mean? So this particular episode, he was repowering and refurbishing and re everything, the bathroom and the shower and the jacuzzi in the tub. And I'm sure you're going to remember this moment. And he was asking her how she wanted the controls, or I'm trying to remember something about, are the controls okay, or how do you want the controls on the jacuzzi? And the joke was, she said, I want low, medium, and who needs Tim?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, the laugh was like 3 hours long. I mean, it was ridiculous. And
I think
what is that?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think watching it back for us now, because we were kids when we watched it the first time, obviously we didn't get that stuff, right?
Of course.
I was surprised at how many of those types of jokes are in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We had a lot.
Yeah.
Right. But there you go. You just confirmed, which we knew of. I mean, if you're 9 years old, that joke is meaningless, but it's okay. Right. They're allowed to go, who needs Tim? Ha ha. Who needs Tim? But those who were older got the joke, and it was absolutely, when you think of it, it's a completely filthy joke. But we got away. ABC was good because they knew, who was that going to offend? Nobody. And so, we all came from the school of, and as I said, I did stand up for 19 years, you can be funny and clever and even dirty without saying those words. I mean, today, and I don't want to sound like today, can I sound like I'm 100 years old, but you can say pretty much forget obviously the streamers or cable, but even on network, you can say pretty much almost, those 2 or 3 or 4 words you can't say, but you can say everything else. And to me, that just, and again, I am not a prude. I knew the words when I was 8, when I was in camp. I loved the words. But they ceased having any real power for me doing stand-up and then writing for television, because you go, well, that's just a cheap, easy laugh. So if we could find a way to be really dirty but clever, that's okay. Instead of saying, I could rephrase that joke for you right now, and it would be less funny than who needs Tim, because saying the words that you could easily say, first of all, that needs no talent, and there's no real challenge there, So, we love doing those. And again, we didn't have a ton of them, but we had them, sure. By the way, they were a married couple. They slept with each other. They did things. So,
is that what happened? Oh, man.
I didn't ever see it. I've heard rumors.
Okay.
And once I might have seen a small animal scurry through the room, but I don't know what that means. I have no idea.
We kind of wanted to move on.
Sure.
We talked a lot about Home Improvement, so
Sure.
let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that you've worked on. I mean, we've got Friday the 13th, Hey Arnold. You mentioned Buddies earlier, The Sweet Life of
by the
Zack
way,
and Cody.
is it where people turn off the podcast?
Oh, no. They'll stick with us. Jordan, I can take this one here.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of. I'm not going to say speed round because Jordan doesn't like it when I say speed round. But,
I'm very particular about that.
We're gonna, I want to get some memories associated with various work that you've done, and I've cherry picked a few credits here. So just any memories, thoughts. It doesn't have to be fast at all, but I want to just talk about Monsters Today first. What do you remember about that, or what are kind of the big takeaways?
Yeah, no. Well, I really began. I mean, this is stuff that I don't know. Somebody might find interesting. I don't, but I really began writing for a company called the Arthur Company in, I think it was the mid-'80s. There was a guy named Arthur Anacarico he was like a white Sammy Davis. He wore more jewelry. I mean, it was frightening. And he made a lot of money. But he had all these shows on WTBS, and one was called Safe at Home. One was called Rocky Road. And these were shows that did very well. We shot them for no money, shot an episode every week with a tiny, tiny budget. That's really how I learned to write. And anyway, there was a woman named Patricia, what's her last name? Can't remember her last name. Patricia, I'm blanking. But anyway, she was a producer on the Monsters Today, and she had worked on Safe at Home. And so she called me in and said, would you want to write an episode of The Monsters Today? And I'd seen the show, and obviously it was just kind of a remake of The Monsters, which I loved when I was 5 years old. And I went, well, that sounds fun. So I did it. The money was tiny, but to be able to write an episode of that silly show was a ton of fun. I called in a friend of mine named Bob Destry. We wrote it in, I think, an hour and a half, and it showed. But it was fun. It was really fun. So I will tell you, there was, I think around that time, you mentioned Hey Arnold. I have a friend named Joey Paul Jensen who's a big casting director, and we work together on a bunch of stuff. And so she was casting Hey Arnold, which is a cartoon, as you guys know, or animated show. People like the word cartoon. And so I played the part of a baseball broadcaster, which was really my dream. And I remember I had to come up with a home run call, and I said that ball is cream spinach. That was my line. And the only reason I'm telling you this boring story is that I keep getting residuals. I mean, this is from 30 years ago, 30 plus, and I swear to you, guys, I'm not making this up. I got a check last week for 8 cents. 8
Ooh.
cents. Swear to you. And by the way, they took out taxes. They took out like 24 cents. I could have been 32, which is very upsetting because now I can't buy a paper. So, but and I think this actually is interesting. I remember I called SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild union, and I said, not then, because I've gotten other idiotic checks like that, and we all have, and I said, guys, this is stupid. I mean, why can't we come up with a dollar value like $3, $6, whatever's going to make zero dent in a human being's life, no matter how bad their life is, put it all in a giant fund, and save it for people who actually need the money. It's going to grow into thousands and thousands and tens of and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I said, you spent 50 cents on a stamp and an envelope and manpower. It's insane. And I said, too much paperwork. It's too much paperwork. You had paperwork to send me a check for 8 cents. This is ridiculous. And it goes on to this day. And there was a club in L.A. called Residuals many, many years ago. And people would come in. They had a big bulletin board. And people would stick their idiotic minuscule residual checks on the board. 1 cent. It was every dollar value from 1 cent to 3 cents. So 8 was not apparently the lowest by at least 7 cents. But it's just so stupid. So when you said, Hey Arnold, you reminded me of that. The Friday the 13th thing, that was the show that Mark Scott Zicree created. And that was my first credit because what happened was, excuse me, they needed Canadian writers because it was shot in Toronto, and I am a Canadian. I'm dual, so I'm legal. And I had a writing partner at the time named Marilyn Anderson, and she was really a go-getter. And somehow she heard about that show, and she called me. She said, can you write science fiction? I said, I have no idea. So I watched the show, and it was kind of like The Twilight Zone because Mark had written the book, and he loved that. And they had kind of twist endings. It was about a curio shop, and all the items, I think, had disappeared, and they were all haunted, and they had to recover them one by one. It was an interesting idea and well done with, again, a tiny, tiny budget. Anyway, we met with Mark, And I remember this is sort of interesting. Again, this is so many years ago. And he said to Marilyn and me, he said, listen, I'm going to give you guys a job because we really need Canadians. I have no idea if you guys can do this, but telling you one thing. I know you're both comedy writers. No jokes. No, I've never heard this in my life. No jokes. Right. And when you write a show as serious and straight as this, it's really tough because everything is a setup to a joke, right? And I said, okay, it's going to be hard. He said, I got you. No, he said it like 1,000 times. And so we ended up writing 3 or 4. We wrote a 2-parter. We wrote three or 4 episodes. And you know what? It was really fun. And that's really the first thing I ever wrote in my life. And you know what? Writing stuff without jokes was kind of easy because you don't have to. Jokes are hard. Jokes are really hard. So it was a lot of fun. And I stayed in touch with him for years. And he really gave me my first break. That did help. I got to tell you, I made a few bucks, and I could tell people I'm a writer. You know.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Any memories from Buddies at all?
Yeah, Buddies was interesting because both Dave and Brewer were really talented, but it just, I don't know, it just didn't meld. I don't know why. I mean, look, Dave went on to have this massive career pretty much on his own, and I think he always, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, I mean, he's a tremendous talent. I just think he felt that it was honestly a little beneath him, you know? Yeah. And if he hates me for saying that, so be it. I will tell you one thing. I used to wear suits all the time. This sounds so obnoxious, but it's true because it is show business. And my uncle was a big talent agent in Montreal, where I'm from, and he always looked very dressed and really put together, and I really respected the business. So I'm telling you this for a reason. So I always wore a suit, especially when we taped, especially on tape night. And Dave Chappelle would call me Silky. I'll never forget that. And he went, man, you dress well for a white guy, which, you know, if you said the opposite, people would kill you. But he did say that to me, and I thought it was pretty adorable. But it was not, you know, it was never a great show. Unfortunately, you're missing a bunch of credits of mine only because I did a lot of shows kind of behind the scenes, like all the shows I wrote on the Disney Channel, which I mentioned Sweet Life, I think, for a second.
Yeah, we're getting to that one. That is on the list here. But yeah, go.
Well, yeah. So Buddies was, you know, it was a fun show. We had a great cast. But the show just didn't explode. Thunder Alley, I loved writing because Haley was special. And Haley and Ed, that show should have been a much bigger hit. They were a comedy team. You had Ed Asner, who looked 80 when he was 12, and Haley, who looked 0 when he was 5. And those two together, I will tell you, they were a comedy team because Haley, as I mentioned before, he was a genius. I mean, this kid, I remember the day that I met Haley. He was like the size of a thumbnail. And it was the first day, table reading, where the whole cast gathers and we're going to go, what do we have here? We think it's funny. And I said to him, I was trying to make people around me laugh. I said, so let me hear your credits. And he goes, well, when I was 2.5, I did a thing. And when I was 3, I did a thing. And I did a thing when I did a thing. When I was 2, I did a thing. And he's still talking. And I'm going, okay. And he said, and then I just have a movie coming out called Forrest Gump. So that's going to be with Tom Hanks. I went, okay, I better shut up now. I look like an idiot. And that kid was unbelievable. And he and Ed were brilliant together. I loved writing that show, I will tell you. And apparently the numbers were pretty good, but there was some politics with that show. And I can't really get into it, but it should have been a bigger hit than it was. And I think we lasted 2 years. And it was too bad because writing those guys together was really, I mean, I remember they asked me to write all the promos, like the short commercials for the show. And I wrote those in like seconds because they were just really funny. I remember one was Haley sitting on Ed's lap going, Grandpa, why do you have more hair in your ears or on your head? I mean, you know, it was huge. Yeah. And I don't know, and audiences loved it. And when we taped the show, people loved it. But for whatever reason, ABC canceled it. And I do remember this. Opposite Frasier and NBC, we were beating Frasier, believe it or not. And that's crazy. I swear to you. And for some reason, ABC said, no, we don't want the show on our network. So who knows? Show business is weird.
Frustrating when things like that happen. Yeah. I'm sure. Let's talk about The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. That's a show that I feel like Jordan, I don't know if you agree with this, but was kind of popular when we were in middle school, high school.
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, you know, again, I think I had no credit on that show, unfortunately. Because I was essentially the creative producer, or consulting producer rather, and I was in the writer's room. I was on the show for 7 years, and I was in the writer's room, I think the first 3 maybe, but then Disney decided, well, and then I was on the set Thursday and Friday when we taped, and then they said where I would change jokes if the audience didn't laugh. And they went, well, he's not going to hold back, so why don't we need him in the writer's room Monday to Wednesday? We'll just pay him less, but maybe more per day. We'll only hire him for 2 days a week, so that's what happened, because Disney does that. Anyway, and they did that then. I'm sure they still do it today, and I hope they don't listen, but they don't. So anyway, so basically my job was when we would tape on Thursday, we'd tape a bunch of scenes without an audience, and then we'd only tape what was left on Friday with an audience, because little kids can't really be expected to sit for 3-4 hours, which is how long the show can take to tape, even though it's only 22 minutes. So we would have, 6 or 7 scenes left on Friday, and that's what we do in front of the audience. So my job was to, if a joke didn't work in front of the audience, was to kind of change stuff on the fly. And I love that. I mean, the challenge to me was so much fun, and it was really a fun show. Those kids were phenomenal. They were phenomenal. And I remember a bunch of stuff from that show. And Brenda Song, who to me was brilliant, to be that pretty and to nail down comedy that well, she was amazing. And she did something that no actress I've ever seen before or since or during do, which was I would give her jokes during the taping. I'd whisper something to her if a joke didn't work. And she'd, generally speaking, get a huge laugh. And then she would turn to the audience and say, it wasn't me. That was one of her writers, Billy Riback. Now, no actors do that. They just don't. And she did it. And it was something I'll never forget. But the boys were great. They were both like Jonathan. I mean, Zach was great, and Karn was very young, but he was solid. But Dylan and Cole were both like miniature Jonathan Taylor Thomas. They're not miniature; they were essentially his age, and they could nail the hell out of jokes. So they were incredible. I'm trying to remember one line. Oh God, what was it? It was one joke that Dylan did on Cole. Honey, I can't. It's so long ago. I can't remember it right now. But anyway, you could hand them something 5 seconds before, and they would do it like they'd been rehearsing it for a month and a half. They were pretty, and we had a great writing staff, and the audiences were so sky high when they would come in, because when you're a little kid and you're seeing these other little kids only on your TV, and then you see them in front of you, it's got to be a weird sort of surreal thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And to feel that vibe, and when kids laugh, well, it's the greatest sound in the world. I mean, what's better than that? It was unbelievable. So I did love, and when you write for kids, when we talked before about Who Needs Tim, you can't do even those jokes on the Disney Channel. You had to kind of go a whole other level, and you'd have to throw at the first 11 things you'd think of, and still find a way to be funny. And we did. It was very interesting. I do remember one joke I wrote, because I was also on Wizards of Waverly Place, and I did work on the pilot of Hannah Montana, and put in a bunch of jokes on that, and got zero credit for that. But on Wizards of Waverly Place, I do remember one particular line. Again, this is going back like 10, 11 years. But forget his name, but the kid who played the younger brother was really, really sharp. And there was one episode where his evil side sort of came out of him, and was making him do really bad things, mess up his room, really bad TV things. Mess up his room, maybe lie. And at one point, they're fighting. And somebody says what they had was, what are they doing? And somebody said, they're fighting, which is not exactly a joke. And at that point, the actor grabbed the actor playing his bad self and kind of threw him to the ground. So what I pitched was he's wrestling with his conscience. And it's one of those moments where you go, I'm never going to be able to pitch that joke ever again, anyhow, anywhere. And I do remember the showrunner going, the audience is never going to understand it. And the Disney representative was there, and he went, it's a perfect joke. What are you talking about? It's a perfect joke. He said, never going to work. And so the Disney guy said, we're going to be doing it. And not only did the audience go crazy, they used that joke as the promo for the episode. So, those are the little victories that you kind of hold on to, Yeah, and again, I had no credit on that show, but that was an outstanding moment. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, that's great. Last one here, Ask Harriet.
Yeah, Ask Harriet was very interesting. That was a show that I love Tootsie. I mean, to me, it's one of the great movies ever written. But I had become friends with David Cassidy. The origin of that show is way too long to get into now. I could do an hour and a half just on that. But the genesis was I had become friends with David Cassidy. I saw him on Broadway in a show called Blood Brothers, which came out of England, and he did it with his brother Sean. And the audience reaction when David came out on stage was like the Beatles reunion. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I went, oh my God, this guy is poised to be a star again. And it turned out that, so I called my girlfriend. I said, this guy we got to do something here. I mean, he's amazing. And so she said, well, believe it or not, my assistant is his friend because she's a lawyer. And I went, okay, that's weird. And it was just the craziest. This show business makes no sense. And so I said, can you get me his backstage phone number? She said, absolutely. So I called him backstage like 10 minutes later. It was insane. I said, this is going to sound really weird. I forget the guy's name, but I just got the number from your assistant who works for or your friend who works for my girlfriend, her assistant. It was just bizarre. And so I said, I want to meet you. So we met in New York. We hit it off. And I had just signed a deal at Sony. I think it was a 2-year deal. And I was able to walk in, every day and pitch anything I wanted to. And so David told me about an idea he had from years earlier about a guy who dresses as a woman to get a job at a paper because he'd been fired previously. And that's all he had. He just had that. Right. Honest to God, he found it. He had it on a napkin. And that's it. And I went, okay, well, that's a show. And so I developed it with another guy who already had a deal at Sony. And that's how it happened. We created a show where there was this real macho guy who had slept with his female boss at a newspaper. And he gets fired because she couldn't wait to fire him because he wrote some sort of scathing article ripping, I think, the owner of the local football team. It was something like that. Okay. And he's unemployed now, and he's got a daughter, and he's a single dad. What's he going to do? And he finds out the female advice columnist for the paper has died or she retires, and they need a new person to write that column to give advice to women. And so he decides, with the help of his best friend, that because he knows more about causing women problems than anybody in history, because he's this real macho, he'll write the column. But how's he going to do it? Because he's a guy. So he'll send in sample questions and answers. He gets the job, but the female editor whom he slept with as a guy wants to meet Sylvia Coco. And so he goes, what am I going to do? And his friend says, you'll dress up one time, you'll go in, you'll fool her, we'll get you the best people, a great outfit. He goes, you're insane. The next scene, of course, he walks in. The audience went ballistic when he walked in. We had an amazing actor. He comes in dressed like, like a fashion model. And she, of course, the editor does not recognize him. And he's flirting with her as a woman because he keeps forgetting that he's a guy. And then when he hugs her goodbye, he hugs her, lets go, then he hugs her again, and which was a huge laugh, and he gets the job. And now, basically, he's condemned to a life of, because she says, you're so fantastic, what a personality, we have to see you in public all the time. You'll go to grocery store openings, you'll cut ribbons, and now to get his job back, or not back, to get a job, he has to appear as a woman in public all the time. And that was the show. And we did, I think we shot 13 episodes. Fox got terrified, because we got the best hair and makeup people, the best wardrobe people, and he looked, I'm not going to say he looked exactly like a woman, but it was TV good enough. It wasn't bosom bodies, the breasts weren't sagging, and we got this, he was fantastic, and I think Fox got terrified that he looked so good. There must have been some homophobia going on at the time, I don't know. Okay. And they canceled it, and it was very upsetting because it was a really, really, the pilot of that show was as funny as anything I've ever worked on. I got to tell you guys. And, we did 13, but canceled after 5. And the rest are in the TV archives somewhere gathering massive dust right now. I have all the episodes if you ever want to see them. They were really fun.
Yeah, a lot of talent on that show, too, it looks like. Ask Carrie.
Oh, a ton of talent. Yeah, well, Willie Garson played the guy's, I'll tell you a quick show business story. He played the guy's assistant, and Willie went on to do a ton of stuff. He was on Sex and the City, and I think NYPD Blue. I mean, he's worked for years and years and years. And he's a little skinny, bald guy, and our lead guy was incredibly handsome. And Willie was brilliant in the audition. And Fox said to us, there's no way that this macho guy would ever have Willie Garson as his friend. And we said, no, there's every way, because he's very insecure. He would never not, double negative on purpose, have Willie Garson, because there's going to be no threat. Then they walk into a bar, he's going to get laid. Willie has no chance. They went, no way. And I said, no, it's a unity of opposites. It's like The Odd Couple. And this female executive who's long retired, she said to me, well, The Odd Couple wouldn't work today. And I went, oh, God, we're in trouble. But I fought and fought and fought, and Willie got the part, and they were brilliant together. I mean, they were brilliant. So, you know, sometimes executives have no idea what they're talking about. Anyway, I remember that very, very well.
Sounds like it.
What are you going to do, right?
Right, yeah. Show business.
The way it goes sometimes.
As they say, I guess. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So on my research here that Adam has done, I see that you wrote jokes for Rodney Dangerfield in the 70s, which Adam and I both love Rodney Dangerfield. We're big back-to-school fans, and so I was just wondering if you could speak about that at all.
I will tell you how it began. I'll just tell you the genesis. It was kind of amazing. My friend Steve Middleman, who's a brilliant comedian, matter of fact, Steve won the first official comedy competition, I think, in the history of this country called The Great Laugh-Off on Showtime. And Steve Middleman came in first, and Eddie Murphy came in fifth. You can look it up. I swear to you it's true. So, you know, Steve's had a good career. He's not Eddie Murphy, but he's a fantastic comic. You can find him all over YouTube. Anyway, Steve was in New York. He knew Rodney, and he was at Rodney's club called, not surprisingly, Dangerfield. Rodney's on stage doing a joke, and Steve knew that I had written that joke. But he also had and Steve and I are best friends to this day, but I would have told him that I wrote a joke for Rodney, and I'll be honest with you guys, not a great joke, but Rodney did it on stage. And Steve's thinking, how did that happen? Because Billy would have told me I wrote a joke for Rodney. So Steve went up to Rodney after the show and said, you know what, it's a funny joke, but I don't know where you got it from, but my friend wrote it. And Rodney said some other guy had sold him the joke. And Steve said, well, that other guy ripped off Billy Riback. And Rodney said, well, that's crazy. I paid him. And Steve said, I know, but the guy, you know, I'm telling you, he saw Billy do it somewhere. And Rodney said, okay, get me his information. And 3 days later, I had a check for $75 in the mail that Rodney sent to me immediately. And you go, okay, that just doesn't happen. So Rodney paid for the joke twice. And I'll tell you the joke. It's not a great joke, but he did it on stage. The joke, the way I had done it was I went to an old people's home at Halloween, and people were bobbing for applesauce. That was the joke. And Rodney did it. He said, I'm getting old. And, you know, he did the joke. And Steve went crazy, and Rodney paid me for it. And it's not believe me, Who Needs Tim is a lot funnier than bobbing for applesauce. But you know what? You don't find a mensch like that in show business every day. And I got that check, and like an idiot, and believe me, I needed the $75. I cashed the check. I think as I tore open the envelope, I was in the bank. And I wish to God I had framed that. I mean, how do you not?
Definitely.
But what are you going to do, right? But that's how that all started. Rodney was fantastic.
That's an awesome story. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, true.
So returning to Home Improvement briefly here, you know, right now everybody's of late been talking about a reboot. We'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up here with one of the core writers. So, you know, in terms of a reboot, if there were one, what would you want to see out of it? Would you be involved at all? What would you expect? Anything of that nature? Me
personally, I'd love to be involved. That show was special. It changed my life. So I would love to be involved, and I would certainly love if some of the people who've since retired, writers I'm talking about, would come back, and we could get the core group. You talk about core. Get the core group of writers back. I mean, everybody's obviously aged quite a bit. There's some who would probably have no interest, but I think there's a couple who would want to do it. But I would, I can't explain it. Tim and I have nothing in common as human beings other than we're both comedians. And I'm a Jew from Montreal, and he's a Gentile from Detroit, and he loves power tools, and Scotch tape to me is a power tool. I mean, I know nothing.
Sounds like
nothing.
That. Yeah.
But because the show wasn't about that, it was really about men and women. That's the core of the show. Power tools were an adjunct, obviously, and people didn't understand the show, just to this day don't know. And if you know human nature, it's about men and women. Why do we do things differently? That's really the show, of course. So I loved writing that. I loved it. And there was so much truth without being offensive, and we weren't trying to be politically correct because that phrase didn't exist. So I would dearly love to be a part of it. Could it happen? He's got Last Man Standing. It does fine. It's not remotely the breakout hit that Unproven was.
Yeah.
And I think theoretically Tim would be interested, but I can't speak for him. I have no idea. Could we get the cast back? Again, there's so many question marks. I don't know. I mean, there's a million ways to go. Would he still be married? Would he be divorced? And would we see her life and his life? Would they still see each other because the kids are all grown up? I mean, look, there's infinite storylines. Believe me, there'd be no dearth of ways to go with the show. And I would say that with Roseanne coming back and going off the air, obviously for very different reasons, it would have been a hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it could work because there is nostalgia, no question about the show. And the thing, and I alluded to this earlier, it is evergreen, and the show would be evergreen if we did it again, because the one thing that Matt Williams, who created the show, the other two guys, what he always insisted on, and it was interesting, very few topical jokes in that show. Very few. Mm-hmm. There are a few names, and we had Mario Andretti on, so that's an actual human being. Mm-hmm. But you watch other shows, and they make references to stuff, even passing references to stuff in the news or whatever it might be. And that's like Murphy Brown, which I wrote an episode of Murphy, and I did the warm-up for the show for the first, I think, 3 years. But Murphy Brown, I'd either never syndicated or it didn't last very long because the whole show was topical, so it's meaningless now,
Yeah.
But we didn't have that problem. The show was about people and characters and how they related to each other, and it was not. I'm not going to say cheap laugh, but it was not about getting a laugh just because we made a reference to something that people would know from the news or whatever. So we could pick that right up because that's why the show wasn't considered hip. We weren't talking about stuff, big issues. We were talking about people. So you could write that show. I mean, honestly, and I rarely watch the show. I mean, I have all the episodes, but every now and then I'll put an episode on, I go, wow, that still sounds kind of fresh because it's just people talking about each other, and that could work pretty much forever. And Matt insisted on that, and that was really his genius of saying, look, I don't know what's going to happen. And we're talking about the very beginning. Who knew it was going to be the hit it was going to be? I mean, I did after the pilot, but we didn't really know.
Yeah.
So it was always written with the intent of lasting, it's not forever, but pretty close. So if we did a reboot, it would be the same mindset. And I think we could pick up where we left off, but without Tim, we got no show, obviously. So, if he were amenable, I think Richard Karn, would jump on it in 2 seconds. And we'd figure it out from there. But, I would love to bookend my career with that show would be a total joy, 1,000,000,000%.
That's a really interesting point you brought up about the lack of kind of pop culture in the show. And I think when it is brought up, it's like the Beatles or something that is kind of always going to be relevant or something.
Right.
People know. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
Not an artist who had a hit that hour. Because you'd go, what? And on Murphy Brown, they were doing shows like Dan Quayle Can't Spell Potato, which may mean nothing to you guys, but that was a big thing then, and that's meaningless now. So that show just could not syndicate, and that's where the money was generated from Home Improvement was in syndication. So Matt was smart. So the other two guys, they knew we're writing a show with a purpose. We want the show to be fun and relevant for all time, and it pretty much is. So it would be fantastic. What can I tell you? So we'll see. Who knows? One day.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
We got 2 people on this call who want to see it happen. So there's small sample size, but whatever. But as we wrap up here, we just want to say we've really enjoyed talking to you. I mean, I'm speaking for me and Adam here, but I think he would agree. It's been awesome to hear.
I mostly enjoy talking to you.
And I could tell. I was directing all my responses really to you. I don't know if you felt it, but it really were directed much more to you.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's been great. We really appreciate you being so gracious with your time.
Yeah, and we want to give you kind of a last opportunity here to talk about where can people find you? What are you working on now? What's your Twitter handle? All that good stuff, so we can get more Billy in our lives.
Oh, that's very sweet. What is my Twitter handle? That's a really, really, really good question. I'm so hip. So hip. We'll go there now. I'm going to warn you, your audience. I have to say this because if you're going to check my Twitter handle, a lot of it is very anti the president. Just be aware of that. I am not a fan. I'm sure you got people out there who love the president. God bless. I do not. So much of it, many of the jokes are directed towards that human being, and it's at Billy Riback, capital B, small r for Riback, R-I-B-A-C-K. One thing I'd like them to check out if they're over a certain age, I did a thing on Funny or Die a long time ago, maybe 8-9 years ago, called Mr. 10%. And I'm very proud of it. I play the world's worst agent, and I would say it's one of my favorite things I've ever done in my life. I mean, it made me literally zero money, but I don't care. Mr. 10% on Funny or Die, type in my name, type in Ed Asner's name, because he plays a client I'm trying to sign, and it's laugh out loud funny. I have to say that it's really funny. Other than that, I'm working on with my partner Steve Rubin, the gentleman I mentioned earlier with the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia book. We've written 11 screenplays and 5 pilots in the last 3.5, 4 years, and we're hustling like every other idiot in town, trying to sell. And selling movies is a whole other ball game, but we're trying, and they're all comedies because we need more comedy on this planet. We really do. So look for our names. I don't know. Hopefully the theater near you. I wouldn't say tomorrow, but maybe in the near future. And you can find me on Twitter. And if you love Trump, I'm not going to argue with you now. We can talk about it another time. I just urge you to listen to him, and then maybe you'll stop loving him. But so a lot of the jokes are there, and they're not mean. They're just sort of based on stuff he said. But again, I don't want to make this. This is not about politics. And I just said Home Improvement was not, and that's why it lasted. So, but on my own, I have things to say. And the other thing that I'm proud of that again will not. It's not something that you guys can really follow, but it is interesting. I do teach stand-up comedy to kids. And it's really one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life. And I'm talking about little kids, like 7, 8, 9 years old. And we do a showcase for the industry 2 or 3 times a year. We just did the showcase last night. It so happens. Wow. And I MC. It's really the only time I go on stage anymore. I got to tell you, these kids, oh, my God. I'm talking 7 years old. We had this girl on last night named Clayton Eustace. She's 7 years old, and her opening joke that I gave her was, because she's tiny. I mean, she's tiny. And she says, "Hi, my name is Clayton. I'm 2, but I'm tall for my age." And the audience goes insane, And these kids get up, and we started with them a month ago, and 1 month later they're on stage in front of people from Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, agents, managers, casting people. And they are, not every kid, of course not, but we had 17 kids, and they were amazing. And my opening joke was, I said, look, this is how the world is changing. I said, we have 17 kids. We have 5 boys and 12 girls. And I said, and I used to be a woman. So that was the opening. That was the opening joke. But it's true. We did have. Excuse me. That was the breakdown. And the world is changing inexorably, and it was kind of great. And the girls were really strong. It was amazing. So that's who knows? We may turn it into a series one day. I don't know. We're in discussion with some people, but selling anything is really tough. So I don't know. I'm out there. You can find me, and we should. If you guys ever come to LA, find me and let's talk. If you want to private message me, I can send you my. I think you have my email, so I can send you my phone number. This is just my landline, which I never answer except tonight. So. I'll give you my cell phone, and we can certainly stay in touch. And if I know anything that you guys might find of interest, I'll certainly let you know too. Okay?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, thanks again so much, Billy, and maybe we'll talk to you again somewhere down the line. But we're very pleased and looking forward to having people hear this. So thanks again.
Okay, gentlemen, really my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Take care. Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Bye.